if you don't have realistic expectations about what is or isn't possible, you can end up beating yourself up constantly feeling guilty, constantly feeling overwhelmed. And you really put yourself in an impossible situation. So you're not going to be successful. You're not going to be feeling good about what you're doing or not doing. And also, you're not going to be making as effective choices and decisions.
Hello, Profit First entrepreneurs and thought leaders. I am so excited. We have a special guest, and she's actually one of my favorite authors. I know you guys love Mike Michalowicz, and we talk plenty about that, but we actually have an amazing author today, and we're going to take a different spin on things. We're going to talk about time management, but not in your traditional way, not in the way of grabbing your calendar and like blocking out every moment, but really digging behind it. And I really love this author because she takes a completely different spin on it. And we're going to talk about, that psychological behind the scenes, behavioral management, everything that really goes into getting things done. And our guest today, her name is Elizabeth Grace Saunders, and she is the founder and CEO of a company called Real Life E. And that is a time management coaching company that doesn't just help people with schedules and getting things done, but it really speaks to, I'm going to call you guys the top 1% of entrepreneurs. You guys out there that are killing it every day, that are passing that 7-figure mark, that are doing what your peers have never done before. And what she does is she helps entrepreneurs that are struggling with guilt, feeling overwhelmed, or frustrated, really find peace and confidence in what they're able to accomplish. Now, she has an amazing resume. I've read a few of her books, and I was like, we got to get this lady on this podcast. Okay. She is one of the world's top 30 time management professionals. She is also a Christian, and a lot of her teachings really focuses a lot on those principles. She's McGraw Hill published. She's got 3 books. First one, which is one of my favorite ones, is The 3 Secrets to Effective Time Management, How to Achieve More Success with Less Stress. She's also got a Harvard Business Review published book called How to Invest Your Time Like Money, because right now I think time is the new currency, right? And Faith Words published her 3rd book, which is called Divine Time Management. And you guys can find Elizabeth on her blog. She writes for the Harvard Business Review. She writes for Forbes. She writes for Fast Money. She's also appeared on CBS, ABC, NBC, and Fox. So please join me in welcoming Elizabeth to the platform. Hey, Elizabeth, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I'm going to do a fangirl scream for a minute, okay? Because I'm telling you, I started reading your book and I could not put it down. It totally takes a whole different spin to things. And one of the things, I'm going to start with one of the quotes from your book. You actually quote Warren Buffett, and you say, the rich invest in time, the poor invest in money. I like the behind scenes stories, Elizabeth, before we dive into just some of your teachings. What made you write this book? What made you write these books, particularly about time management? Because, it's a completely different spin than normal people, right? Because you start with the psychology, and then I'll let you start from there.
For sure. So in terms of what prompted me to write my books, and in particular, the first one, which you're referencing right now, The 3 Secrets to Effective Time Investment, it came out of the fact that I was developing this niche in the time management world of being a time management coach. And right now we're here recording live in 2022. That might not sound that innovative, but I began being a time management coach back in 2009. And so at the time, which it was over 13 years ago, it really was kind of a new concept for someone to coach people through the change of time management. Primarily, there was time management training where someone would come in and give you the system and show you how to do that for maybe, a day or half a day or a week, and then let you be. And you try to kind of struggle to figure that out on your own. And there just weren't as many time management coaches. That doesn't mean there maybe weren't any in the world. So I don't want to make that assumption, but it just wasn't as common. And so I started out with this work in 2009, really figuring out what does it take to help people have actual change. And as part of that process, I work with individuals for at least 3 months. And so what makes my perspective different and my books different from someone that might be more of a trainer was that I needed to show up every week and talk to people and find out what was working or not working and where they were struggling, what it really took to bring about this change. And so what I had discovered by 2012, which is when I wrote my first book, The 3 Secrets to Effective Time Investment, is that so much of this change actually required psychological change. And so that's why in that book, I start out talking about crippling emotions that can come in your way and just effective mindsets that you can incorporate in your life in order to actually have this change happen. Because if your left brain knows what to do, but your right brain is like fighting you constantly, you're not actually going to see that change. And so that was something that others may have been talking about, but it definitely wasn't common thing back when I was starting to talk about it 10 years ago. And I really wanted to bring to the field, how do we really help people change? And what I had found is it was as much psychological as it was like practical, tactical tips.
Oh yeah, definitely. I remember my first time management class, and it seems so archaic now that I've read your book. It was like an internship at Procter and Gamble. And I remember they gave me this big old fancy like Stephen Covey planner. It had like, it felt like days for like the next 10 years in there that I had to carry around. And I remembered like looking at it, and I mean, it was pretty, but in terms of actually using it, I admit, I had fallen off the bandwagon probably week one on there. So definitely a different take on it. And one thing that really stood out when I was reading your book, Three Secrets of Effective Time Management, how to achieve more with more success with less stress, was that when we're feeling overwhelmed, I think a lot of us entrepreneurs have felt that way recently, especially with COVID, especially with the great resignation. I think a lot of us have been doing two jobs, maybe three instead of one, and maybe even demanding that from our employees just to get things done, right? Was that, sometimes when you're feeling overwhelmed, sometimes when you're feeling like I can't do anymore, maybe that's your soul. And it's not just about your soul, but maybe you can't do anymore. Maybe it's physically really impossible for you to do more. And I love how you talk about it's important, first of all, before you even begin that time management journey, to set realistic expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in that book, I talk extensively about realistic expectations. And the reason for that is that if you don't have realistic expectations about what is or isn't possible, you can end up beating yourself up constantly feeling guilty, constantly feeling overwhelmed. And you really put yourself in an impossible situation. So you're not going to be successful. You're not going to be feeling good about what you're doing or not doing. And also, you're not going to be making as effective choices and decisions. And so I really like people to step back from situations before they dive in, like even with if my clients work with me one-on-one, we step back and look at their whole schedule from a macro level point of view, everywhere from how much they're sleeping to when they're working to the personal commitments they might have, and just ask like, does this actually fit? Is this actually possible? And if it's not, if there's something that's completely unrealistic, then we adjust the expectations before getting into the micro level things. Because if you, on a micro level, just try to be more efficient or faster or get a tool or be more focused, but on a macro level, you're completely overwhelmed and overcommitted, you're going to end up feeling like a perpetual failure. So I think that is a huge part of it. And especially for entrepreneurs, they tend to be very creative, very future focused, be able to see opportunities, like new possibilities. And so I think they can be especially prone to unrealistic expectations where they think if they think of it, they should be able to do it right now. And that's often not true.
Oh, so very true. And you're right. I mean, I think entrepreneurs, especially those that are really successful at their craft, they're not your average bear, right? They're probably like, even when they were employees, probably like the number one ranking people, right, in their profession. And it's interesting because you don't really know that you're exceeding expectations, that you're probably delivering more than your peers until you start to supervise somebody else. And unfortunately, when you've been successful, you keep adding more to that mountain, right? And you're like, when you get to that point, eventually we all reach that point, you can't do anymore. And it's like, what's wrong with me? But you're very right. It's about really taking that step back. And I love your book because it forces you to take that step back, whether you're journaling in the book or taking notes, but it forces you to sit there and ponder, when I really map all the things that I'm responsible for, maybe it actually is too much.
Mm-hmm.
And imagine what that
Absolutely.
does to your employees too, like
Yeah.
having over expectations, right?
Exactly. And it actually keeps you from having good expectations and also from prioritizing. So if you realize in advance, oh, like we have too much going on this quarter, or we're under resourced, or it's just not possible to do XYZ at this point, then you can stop, make choices, say, this is what's most important before the end of the year, or this is what's most important in Q1, or this just is not going to happen until we hire more people. And then you can relatively peacefully move forward from that place of realistic expectations and feel like your goals are achievable and attainable. Versus, again, if you don't stop and make clear decisions, what ends up happening is that certain things just aren't going to happen or are going to fall off. Basically, your time schedule, I call the dynamic priorities model, they're just going to fall off the edge. And you will not have actually made a choice on whether that was what you're okay with delaying or not. And so by stepping back, really making those hard choices, you're going to end up with the best possible outcomes for right now and not end up with things that you actually really wish you had prioritized, just not happening because you just ran out of time.
Now, I'm curious because I know you've worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs out there.
Mhm.
I imagine it's very challenging, right? To actually realize at some point that maybe you're expecting too much, right? Maybe I'm expecting to be Wonder Woman and it's just not humanly possible. For those entrepreneurs that are out there that are feeling right now, like Atlas, the weight of the world is on them, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you recognize when you don't have realistic expectations? Because I think as entrepreneurs, we're used to pushing and pushing and pushing and accomplishing more. How do you crack and realize that, this is just too much? It's not humanly possible.
Right. Well, unfortunately, the way a lot of people realize is they start having health issues. So it's not uncommon when people come to me as potential clients that they might have had a recent appointment with a doctor where they're like, you need to reduce your stress. Like you are not sleeping enough, you're not exercising, maybe they're not taking time to eat food that nourishes their body and they're stressed out all the time or like waking up in the middle of the night, not able to sleep through the night because they're thinking about work all the time. And so I would say, unfortunately, that's not the best way, but I would say often it is a way where people get that wake up call where their blood pressure is too high or something else is going on. And like their doctor just says, you have got to change your lifestyle. Like this is not working for you. Another way where this is basically a red flag that can happen is if it starts to hurt your relationships with the people that you care about outside of work. So if you are married to someone that's an entrepreneur, if you're both entrepreneurs, you know that there's not going to necessarily be the completely typical schedule. Like there will be times when you're working late or the weekends or traveling or all that sort of thing. It's not necessarily going to be a 9 to 5. But if work is so all consuming that you're never having time for your family or you're never having time for your friends or you're never having time for downtime, even if you are an entrepreneur and you have a lot going on, that's just not going to be sustainable and often starts to lead to like some tension in the home life about what are the priorities and what are we doing or not doing. So that's again often a red flag. Like if you can't shut off and you feel like you just feel compelled and like you never can take time for your family or for other things important to you, that's often going to let you know there's an issue. And then the third thing where it's a red flag that you're probably taking on too much is when you start to drop important balls. So it's not saying that you'll never have a time when something falls through the cracks, even if you are balanced. Like you might miss an email or there might be some small task that, doesn't go perfectly. And I think that's just kind of life and moving forward. But if you have like major contracts with vendors that go terribly wrong, or there's big initiatives that you should have been working on and you didn't work on them, or it just went poorly in the implementation or execution, that's often a sign like, wait a second, what's going on? Like, why are we not able to do what are the most important things? And like, how are we going to adjust to make that happen? So I would say those are some red flags. If your health is really suffering, if your personal life, particularly your personal relationships are suffering, or if there's something in your business where it's not just like a small thing, it's a big thing that is going wrong, that you need to step back and slow down and figure out how to approach that in a way that's sustainable.
And that is some juicy morsels there, guys.
Mhm.
Very juicy morsels, like what she's talking about in terms of red flags, because even my story as an entrepreneur, we're told, it's stress, but that's just part of life. Stress is just there. It's not going to kill you, right? We've all heard that. And the reality is we do need to listen to those cues around us. And unfortunately, in mainstream, nobody's talking about that. You're not going to turn on a TV and hear somebody say, hey, you're stressed out, slow down. These are the signs that you need to slow down. And what Elizabeth is sharing with you are morsels that nobody is talking about. But reality is stress can kill you, and it's about listening to those cues. I don't think any entrepreneur wakes up one morning and says, I'm going to build this great big business and I'm going to drop balls. I'm not going to meet my deadlines. And when you're not meeting those deadlines, it's probably because you're holding on to too many things, right?
Mhm.
Something is not working and you don't have the space to get the work done.
Mhm. That is completely true. And with prioritizing, sometimes it's going to mean that overall your business does less, but sometimes it just means you do less. Like you delegate more, like you just said, in terms of you have staff members who could be doing more. You delegate to them sooner, you train them to be able to take ownership of things. You hire more staff if that's possible, given your budgets and kind of the staffing situation. But it's okay to have people support you and help you. And I would say one rule of thumb that I've heard that is generally, I think, a good thing to keep in mind with delegation is that unless it's like the most important thing for your business where, this is going to be $1 million decision and you should be there, that sort of thing. If someone can do something 80% as well as you can, delegate it. So, like I said, the very highest top level things, be involved in yourself. The whole bunch of other things, if things get done at a B level or better, it's fine. Just let someone else do it. It's not going to make or break the bank, and it's going to open up time for you to really focus on the strategic and also stay alive for a long time so you can run that business. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
And do other things that matter, right? Like raise your kids and see your spouse too.
Yeah,
And maybe
exactly.
have a couple friends on the
Yeah,
side.
exactly. For sure.
Those things do matter with that. And I like in the book too that you say something that I've never heard anybody else said. Sometimes it's not you, it's sometimes a situation is not repairable. Like you give the example of someone in a job, for example,
Mhm,
and it's just the culture of the company. There's just
mhm.
no way out, no matter how much you do, how efficient you get. It's just the demands, just the culture of the company. You will get more, right? It never gets better. And it's looking at, from an entrepreneur standpoint, I know we can't fire ourselves in a traditional sense, but maybe it's looking at a different line of business or focusing on a different area and letting some parts go where
Mhm.
we don't have the bandwidth to get that down and get that efficient that it impacts our lives significantly. So, I love that part of your book too, Elizabeth.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And if you're someone that's working in a job, then you do want to ask those questions like is it me? Is it the culture? Is it my particular boss? Like, is there some factor that's so great that no matter what I do, I'm not going to be able to get to where I want? And then just like you said with your business, just really thinking it through. And again, you can approach it in a few different ways, like you talked about. So one is you could modify your business, meaning that you might even have some parts of your business that you shut down. I've done that multiple times throughout my entrepreneurial journey since I started my first business in 2005, where I just realized there was like a particular kind of my work I was doing. So, for example, with my first business where I did work in magazine journalism and with marketing firms and marketing companies or marketing departments within corporations, I recognized I actually didn't want to do a part of my work called photo styling. And that was where you set up props for photo shoots. And the reason is there was too many last minute things that could go wrong, and I was getting paid on a project basis. And so all of a sudden, how many hours you thought you would spend on something could massively balloon based on things completely outside of your control. And it really dilutes like the ROI on that versus there were some other parts of the work like doing writing or editing or research or those sorts of things where I had a lot more control over what was happening with my time schedule as well as with kind of the revenue component. And another thing to keep in mind is what clients you're working with. So this is something that I talk to with my coaching clients that are in client services. You might need to rank your clients as A, B, and C clients and people that are just really top line, like you are revenue generating, great to work with, the kind of people you want, like give them the top level service. And some of the B and C level clients, you might limit like how much you respond to things and how quickly you respond. And if you even take on some of those clients at all. And the reason for that is, again, just looking at the overall ROI on your time, you can drive yourself crazy trying to serve everyone and make everyone happy all the time, or you can pick really the best people to work with them, and have a very happy, healthy business.
I love that. I love that. And it goes back to that Warren Buffett quote at the beginning of your book: the rich invest time, the poor invest money.
Mhm,
And in entrepreneurship, you want to invest your time where you're going to get the most ROI.
mhm. Exactly.
And there's so many good, juicy tidbits in your book, so many good things. And one of the things that really stuck out to me too, and again, there was so many things you said in one of your chapter, it's called Your Time Personality. It's important for you to recognize your natural time personality and work with it, not against it, to experience lasting behavior change. So let's talk about it. I mean, the fact that people have different time personality.
Absolutely. So, in terms of different time personalities, of course, there could be all different ways of classifying this. But in regards to the book and what I talked about the idea of spontaneous versus planners. And so, it's not so much that one personality is better or worse or right or wrong. So, that was like really something I tried to emphasize in that chapter. It's not like a judgment that you're a bad person if you tend to be more spontaneous, or you're a better person if you're more of a planner. But it's just recognizing we have some natural tendencies, just honestly based on how we were born, and sometimes because of the culture we grew up in or the family we grew up in. And we should be aware of that, work with that as we can, and then also be aware of when it doesn't serve us best, and then decide how to modify our behavior just to bring the best results. So I'll explain a little bit about what both time personalities are and then kind of how to work with them. So a spontaneous personality is kind of exactly what it sounds like. So they tend not to like to plan. They tend to like to be more in the moment. They tend to look at sometimes scheduling things out or making decisions too far in advance as constricting. And if other people are trying to have them plan things really far in advance, it may even come across as being controlling. Like, why are you having me make a decision on what I want to do on Saturday when it's Tuesday? Because I have no idea how I'll feel on Saturday when it's Tuesday. So they tend to like to go with the flow, tend to like to be in the moment. And their general ethos is they feel like what they tell themselves is that they get the best results by doing what's most important in the moment, or what they feel is most important in the moment. And I would say most entrepreneurs are going to fall more into this category. So that will be like, it's part of why they thrive in chaos or in innovation, because they don't need things all planned out. They're comfortable with responding to a lot of fires in the moment. They don't mind unexpected things happening. They can be pretty flexible. So these are the basic characteristics. And if you know that you have this tendency, you can use it to your advantage in terms of there are certain things you're going to be better at that planners. Like, you're going to be better at responding to some emergencies. Like, it's a great personality for an ER doctor. Like, we want spontaneous people working in the ER because that's how they have to react and respond to what's going on. And it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And even as entrepreneurs, it's good for you to be flexible and innovative and willing to take a lot of things on. So those are all the good sides. The bad side is people can know, or the more difficult sides, if you're spontaneous, is that sometimes you forget things or sometimes you leave things the last minute and then you're working crazy late to try to get it done, and maybe it doesn't get done or it's not super high quality. You might forget to delegate things to other people because you just didn't think about it until it was due the next day. You can end up not planning certain things, so things don't go as smoothly as expected. And you can sometimes drive other people crazy because they're trying to like nail things down, know what to expect, know what to work on, and you're constantly like switching directions. So those are kind of some of the downsides there. In terms of planners, as the name sounds, these are people that will like to have things laid out. They do not experience any anxiety around making decisions. They feel actually more calm and peaceful when decisions are made, when options are closed out. If they make plans with you in advance, it's totally not them seeing it as being controlling. It's them seeing themselves as valuing you. Like, I value you enough to lay aside this time and plan in advance. This is going to be there. And they tend to not struggle with the idea of, oh, I planned this, I'm just going to do it. Versus spontaneous people are more like, oh my gosh, but I don't know if I want to do this plan at this time. So planners can just more easily be like, oh yeah, so it's planned. I'm just going to do what's planned, and it doesn't really matter what I feel like. It's just the plan. So they tend to like more be methodical in that way. So in terms of strengths, they can be very good at being proactive and not being surprised by deadlines, at breaking projects down, delegating things out earlier so they can get support and help, doing things in a way that's more sustainable so they don't have to stay up crazy late, like trying to get things done. So that's all good. In terms of some of the weaknesses, it can be harder for them to adapt and adjust to change. Not always, but sometimes, in terms of feeling a bit thrown off because they'd prefer things went according to their plan. They can be a little overly rigid in terms of doing something because it was on the plan, not necessarily because it was still the best decision. And they may frustrate some other people if they're so like set on what they want to do that they're not willing to change or be flexible for the current reality of the situation. So those are kind of the aspects of both sides. They both have pluses, they both have minuses. And really the most powerful, blessed place to be is working together. So like if you're a CEO, entrepreneur, very creative, you're very spontaneous, you should have a COO who is a planner. And they might get on your nerves sometimes because they're going to be like, okay, like we need to plan out the next 2 quarters. And you're like, I don't even know what I want to eat for dinner tonight. But they're helping you. Like they really are helping you think ahead, be strategic, make decisions. And then vice versa, the planner is going to learn from the CEO about how to be open to opportunities and how to be innovative. And so we can do things to support one another, complement one another. And in my book, I go into a lot of details about other kind of tricks and tips for working together and not driving each other crazy. So they're both good things. We need each other. It's just different.
I love it. And, I'm a CPA by background. So I am probably more on the planner side. We got to prepare for March 15th, April 15th. We got to prepare for the 15th of every month. And then we got to
Yep.
be ready for September, October. And if we're not at this benchmark by this time, we're going to be in trouble and I'm in
Right.
panic mode. But you're right. It's about picking a profession that meets your personality type in terms of how you deal in the moment. Like, you don't want a surgeon that needs to plan it out because if you cut a blood vessel or something, we need to stop this bleed and not panic that we didn't plan like 5 minutes ago not to cut,
Yeah.
about the situation. So very good points on that, making sure you're in the right role based upon your time personality and very good things to look for in terms of weaknesses there. You talked about in your book too, and it talks about different things in terms of like why emotions matter. And I think like as entrepreneurs, we're so used to pushing through things. Like even when we have a bad day, we need to get a surgery. We're not billing well. We have a deadline. We have to push through it. And I like what you talk on in your book about emotions matter and why they matter and the different types of emotions and listening to them because they're indicators that things are not right. And it's not a time management issue. It's something else. And Elizabeth, for a moment, can you talk about why emotions matter and the different types of emotions?
For sure. Yeah. So emotions matter because they influence our behavior. So a lot of times, like if you find yourself procrastinating, not being excited about work, avoiding certain things, or I mean, the opposite, being super excited and getting carried away and doing something all day when you're supposed to be doing something else. Like emotions definitely drive our behavior and have an impact on how we show up in the world. And so I find that the people that are most self aware about their emotions can actually be in the best control of them and harness them the best versus people that are least self-aware and willing to acknowledge them are often most ruled by their emotions. So it's interesting for me to observe that occasionally you'll come across people who in their opinion of themselves consider themselves to be very logical and then they engage in numerous extremely illogical activities. And it's often because they're just so out of tune with, well, why am I getting upset about this? Why am I avoiding this? Why am I reacting in this way? And so the more you can be aware, the more you can take action based on that to bring the best possible outcomes.
I love that.
And yeah, so that's why they matter. And then in terms of emotions and how they can impact time management, of course, there's a huge range of emotions that can impact them, but I'll just touch on a few. So we'll start with one simple one. So this would be guilt. So if you are finding yourself feeling guilty all the time, like you feel guilty at work, like maybe you think you're not doing enough at work, and then guilty at home because you feel like you don't have enough time with your family, all those things, you need to step back and just say, like, okay, well, what is this telling me? And there's basically guilt is when you have a gap between your expectations and the reality of what you're doing. And so to get out of that place of guilt, you either need to change your expectations or change your actions. I'll give an example of expectations and then actions. So let's say you feel guilty because you think you should be at every single soccer game that your kids play in, like even when they're out of town and far away, or even maybe when they're in during work hours or that sort of thing. So you could feel that way, and some people like might feel that way. And you can do one of two things to remedy the situation. So one is you could change your expectations and you might say, you know what, like my expectation is I will go to every soccer game my kids play when they're home games. So like when they're within the same town. But if they're like 2 or 3 hours away or during the, work day, I'm not going to go and it's okay. And so you could change it and then you can let go of guilt because you're incongruence. As long as you are going to all the home games and you're, participating when they're close by, you can be like, okay, I'm going to let go of that expectation, that pressure that I should be there no matter where the games are. Or you can modify your actions. And if you're really not okay with changing that expectation, then you're going to need to plan out your schedule for work and say, okay, like my kids have these games these days. I'm going to block it out of my schedule. And maybe that means I'm going to work late at night or work some on the weekend to make up the time. But I really want to be at every single game they play at. And again, you can get out of guilt that way if you make that a priority. So if you feel guilty, you either need to adjust your expectations or your actions to get yourself back in alignment. And you're the one that gets to decide what that looks like and what that is. Another emotion that can impact people is overwhelm. And there's a number of reasons why people might feel overwhelmed, but I'll address two of them. So one can just be quantity overwhelm when you have more to do than you actually have time to get things done. And if you're in that situation, you can see if you can prioritize, you can delegate, you can hire more staff, maybe choose to work with fewer clients or slow down the pace in some way that way. Or you could be dealing with more like not so much quantity overwhelm, but the speed or rate where you feel you have to get things done. And you can start to slow the speed by, for example, reducing how quickly you answer an email. Like, so instead of maybe answering with 2 hours, maybe answer by the next business day, or doing things like setting more reasonable deadlines so you give yourself more margin with what needs to get done, or just being really careful about what you promise people. Like, so instead of promising, oh, I'll get this to you today, say, oh, I'll get this to you soon, or I'll get this to you next week to give yourself more flexibility. So that's another example of a emotion that can play a role in time management. But there are so many different emotions, and like other ones I'll just quickly list out that can come into play. Sometimes people feel ashamed, sometimes they feel embarrassed, sometimes they feel anxious, sometimes they feel inadequate. So there's all different sorts of things that could be coming up for people. And my job as a coach is to help people understand what those things are and then how to work through them so that they can get done what they want or need to get done.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That's, I think I have felt the overwhelm, with PPP and everything falling on a tax deadline. And I'm sure, I know we've got some accountants that listen in on our podcast too. I'm sure you guys know what it feels like to be done reviewing all your returns and then get five more on your desk at 8 o'clock at night. Definitely, it's time to redo that strategy. One of the things that I like too, Elizabeth, in your book is you actually give out sample schedules, like student schedule, entrepreneur schedules. And I think one of the hardest parts about time management is actually getting started. And for those of us who are knowing that things need to change, right? Knowing that we can't continue the same way. We're feeling the emotions. We've heard the warning signs. We saw the red flags. Where do you start on this journey of creating a manageable life?
Right. Wow. So there's so many different things you could do. I would say if I was doing this on my own and I was just feeling completely overwhelmed by what was going on in my life, I would probably start out by evaluating my commitments, just my overall macro level commitments. So perhaps write down like what you're doing for work, for your business, write down your personal commitments, either to your family or volunteer commitments. Maybe write down, if there's an exercise class you really like going to, whatever it is, like what are all the different things on my plate? And then I would consider cutting from the bottom. So there might be I don't know, some organizations you're a part of that are nice and wonderful and there's nothing wrong with them, but going to that monthly meeting is just taking an extra 3 or 4 hours of your life that you just don't want to give to it right now. Or maybe there's, like, for example, I'm a swimmer and I really enjoy swimming, and I still swim and do that, but I've been in the past more actively involved in a swim team and would actually do swim meets. So they have those for adults. And with a lot of changes going on in my life right now, including getting married in the last year, it was just like, you know what? Swim meets and being worried about like competing at this point is just not a priority. Like, it was super fun when I was doing this, but right now no, it's just not happening. And so like just stepping back and like really looking through what's in and what's out is probably where I would start. And then from there, I would integrate two different habits that I think can get you on the right path. So one is just make sure you're writing everything down. So there are some people that really do try to hold everything in their head that they need to get done. And if you can just have a consistent place to write things down, whether that's a pad of paper or your calendar or a to-do list app, I don't really care where it is, as long as it's just a consistent place where you get things out of your head. And then the second thing, the most important routines you can do are weekly and daily planning. And so where you sit down, think about the coming 7 days. Often that's done on a Friday afternoon or like a Sunday evening or Monday morning. But it's where you just really get a sense of how's my time fitting together? What do I need to prep? What's coming up personally and professionally? Get things laid out. And then on a daily basis, you adapt and adjust for that. And so I think if you're just not sure where to start, number one, write down your commitments and then adjust as needed. And then number two, make sure you're writing down like the smaller tasks. So when I say commitments, I mean like high level commitments. Writing down the smaller tasks you need to get done throughout the day or week. And then number three, like work on that planning. And it'll take a while. There's a whole lot of other things you could be doing, but that's a basic place to get started and to start to give you realistic expectations.
No, I love that. That is really great. Start with first of all, the things that are really important with you and then micro it from there
Mhm.
to the actual daily implementation. That is really good. And by the way, congratulations on your upcoming wedding. I'm reading right now the Divine Time Management. I'm actually through
Oh,
Audible. And
nice.
so I know that whole story, but
Yeah,
congratulations
thank
on
you
that
so much.
upcoming wedding. And by the way, guys, if you haven't read her book, that's Divine Time Management, that one has a Christian spin on it, about like just some things are meant to be and some things aren't, right? And time, a lot of times we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, but it's at the end of the day, it's all working out for a reason. So
Yeah.
another amazing book. But congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm so grateful to have found my husband after a long wait, but God came through. So I'm very grateful.
Yes. Congratulations. That is awesome. And yes, I will put off swimming too, for a little
Yeah.
bit while you get that organized and
Yep.
happening.
Yep.
I don't blame you. Now, Elizabeth, you have dropped so many juicy morsels. I mean, just amazing, amazingness. One of the things that I like to ask just all of our guests, if you could leave one piece of amazing advice, it can be personal, it can be business related. What would that advice be?
So one thing I would give is don't be too hard on yourself. Sometimes people get very discouraged with their time management because they expect everything to be perfect. So like, okay, I made my plan, Elizabeth. I'm really trying to focus. And then some fire came up or some emergency or I got off track and I got distracted on YouTube and they just beat themselves up and then they end up getting off track. And so what I would say is one of the best things you can do is just keep moving forward. So do what you need to do to be organized, be intentional, be proactive, but then don't beat yourself up. If you get off track a little bit, just step back, learn from the situation, and then get right back on track. No one's perfect, and you're going to do best by not being super self critical.
I love that. No point in self-abusing anybody,
Yeah,
including
exactly.
yourself. Let's just all
Mhm.
keep moving forward. Now, you have dropped, like I said, some amazing tidbits. And my next question for you is how do we work with you? How do we find you? I saw that you have a master class coming up in an email. So I'm going to let you tell us what's the best way to work with you, to find you, to learn more about this amazing, different, really different time management strategy that works with who you really are.
Yeah, for sure. So, in terms of the best way to find out about working with me, my website is reallifee.com. So that's REALLIFE and then another E.com. And that's where you can find out all about my coaching, my books, find hundreds of articles that I've written, and probably have more time management things than you ever want in your life. So, you can find all about it there. Contact me if you have questions, and I'm happy to serve you. I do work with people all over the world, so it's a completely location independent service that I can offer to you wherever you are.
I love that all around the world. I'm telling you, I mean, you've been doing it since before COVID, but, a lot of us are just getting used to that worldwide market through Zoom, but that's amazing that that's possible now. And what I'm going to do for you guys that are driving is I'm going to put Elizabeth's contact information in the show notes so that you'll be able to go to her website to connect with her to learn more and implement some amazing time management strategies. Thank you, Elizabeth, for joining us today and dropping such juicy morsels.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. And you had this amazing quote. I think it would be really great to end with this quote. It says this, it's actually like, it's on page 8 and it says, so we need to vigilantly and intentionally decide how to invest our time. Otherwise it will be spent for us. So thank you, Elizabeth, for sharing such amazing wisdom with us and helping make our lives more manageable.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you.